What if Dennis Cornelius had stayed in the IPF? He likely would have been dominating the sport over the last decade and probably would have become the undisputed greatest powerlifter of all time. There's a new series of videos I'm doing where I'm looking at some of the biggest what ifs in powerlifting history. And to me, one of the biggest ones is Dennis Cornelius. The fact that he was so strong as a 120 all those years ago, and the fact his world record still stands today, just goes to show what could have happened had he have stayed. So that's what I'm going to be looking at in this video. Now, I know that some people aren't a fan of hypotheticals or what if scenarios because they think, the classic saying, well, if my grandmother had the wheels, she would have been a bike. Well, guess what? We're going for a ride on grandma. I think hypotheticals are fun. So let's dive into the alternate universe where Dennis Cornelius had stayed in the IPF his entire career. So first, we're going to look at Dennis Cornelius's current resume as it stands. And then we're going to look at what likely would have happened had he had remained in the IPF. We're going to look at the numbers, and you can make your own judgment as to where he would have ended up on your sort of all-time great list when it comes to powerlifters. But when it comes to resumes, to me, it consists of three things. So you have obviously the lifts and the world records of the lifter, right? So what were the best numbers and how does that relate to the world records? Their titles and their competition record being how many times they won, how many times they lost, right? Win-loss record. Titles, so what did they win, right? So world's titles, national titles, all that. And finally, third is head-to-head wins. Who did they beat, right? Those are the three things that make up a powerlifter's resume, in my opinion. So I'm going to go through all three of those for Dennis Cornelius, and then we're going to look at the what-if scenario if he had stayed in the IPF. Because as you'll see, he had an illustrious career, but probably could have had a lot more. So his best lifts are as follows. A 387.5 kilo squat he did back in 2019. Squat was definitely his best lift. Absolute insane squat. I will go through his world records and he still holds the squat world record. 253 bench, which also is a world record that stood for a very long time in the 120s. He did that at 2016 Worlds. And a 347.5 kilo deadlift that he also did at 2016 Worlds, which relative to his squat and his bench is his weaker lift. It was definitely more of a push-pull kind of powerlifter. So those were his best numbers as a 120 under tested conditions as 120. He also competed in and out of untested meets as well, and we'll go through why and how that happened. And he did that as a 125 or around about 125 lifter. So technically 120 plus if you're going by the tested IPF weight classes. And his best numbers there, it's a pretty big jump there. So a 412.5 kilo squat over a 900 pound squat. And keep in mind, yes, this is as a 120 plus, but he only weighed about 125-ish when he did this. How's that for a grind? So that was done in 2018. His best bench was 267.5 at that same meet in 2018. This was actually like unofficial fourth attempt. His best ever bench in a full power comp, I believe, is 262.5. If you're not counting this fourth attempt that he did. And a 355 deadlift, which I could not find footage of. That was back in 2016. Closest I could find was this 352.5 that he did in 2020. And based on how that moved, I don't think you'll have strongest believing that he did 2.5 more than that as well. So 1,015 kilos was his best ever total as a 125-ish lifter, right? There was some meets where he competed in the 140 weight class on the untested side, weighing about 126, 127. But yeah, there you have it, his best ever lifts. So as far as world records go, he is still the current IPF 120 kilo world record holder. That is not a typo. He still holds the record. 978.5 is what he won IPF Worlds with back in 2016, 9 years ago. 9 years later, that still stands as the IPF world record. Now, the caveat is that yes, Rondell Hunt exists and he has beaten that record unofficially, and he is now well into the 1,000 kilos. However, he's the only 120 to be above that. Even Bob, his best of a total matched 978.5. He didn't beat it. And no one else really has come that close to it. I mean, 950s, yeah, but well, I guess, yeah, Nonso's getting close to now. But Dennis Cornelius, 9 years on, still holds the IPF world record, which is kind of crazy. Also, for the hypotheticals here, I'm going to keep Rondell as sort of not in the IPF because, you know, I'm only going to change Dennis Cornelius staying in the IPF. Otherwise, too many variables. He also held the overall 120 total world record, being the heaviest total ever across all federations in raw tested conditions, with that 978.5. That was beaten, like I said, by Rondell, so that stood for quite a while until Rondell, I believe in 2022, was the first time he unofficially beat that at a national level. And he's since upped that to, like I said, 1045 being his best ever meet total. In terms of individual lift squat world records, his squat world records still stand, both IPF and overall. Not a single 120 kilo lifter on earth has squatted more than Dennis Cornelius. That's how good of a squatter he was. So 386 that he did at 2017 Worlds, which I'll show you here, stands as the IPF world record. His overall world record, being the heaviest ever done at any level, is that 387.5 that I already showed you. And yeah, no one has really come, well, I guess Rondell did 385, I believe, when he totaled 1045, so that was within a few kilos. But apart from that, yeah, Dennis Cornelius is one of the greatest squatters of all time, and I had him ranked at, I think I had him ranked at number 2 even. Was it 2 or 3 in my greatest squatters ranking? Somewhere there. But yeah, definitely one of the best squatters to ever do it, and he still holds those squat world records, and he's held for coming on a decade now. His bench world record also stood for quite a while, 253. I know I've already showed you this, but it's such a good bench. I'm going to show it to you again. 2016 was 253, and that stood as the IPF and overall world record for a long time. In fact, it was only officially beaten in the IPF by Devin Williams, who did it, I believe, last year at NAPFs is when he officially beat that record. Rondell has benched more than that at a national level prior to that, and I think Jake Amendola, also benched more than that at USAPL level, hence why the overall record has stood less. But yeah, as far as squat and bench goes, he still is right up there amongst the best of the best, and his records have stood for a long, long time, including squat records that still stand. So basically, when it comes to those two lifts, he's still right up there, and he's taken the world a long time to catch him. Okay, so titles and record. So obviously, he was a 2-time world champion in the IPF in 2016 and 2017. Those were the 2 years he competed in the IPF, and he won both years by quite a long ways. He dominated both years. There was no one close to him. And like I said, no one in the IPF has beat that mark since. He also won 4 USAPL national titles in those years, in the 120s, in those odd years there. And his competition record, so he has competed 18 times in raw full power meets, and he's essentially undefeated. There's 2 blemishes there. The way I set that record, there's wins being 16 times he won his weight class, and the second number is the second places, third number is the third places, fourth number is the other, right? So essentially your first 3 numbers are your podiums. He finished second once, and he bombed out of a meet once, right? Which is that last one you see there. So he bombed out on deadlifts in a meet in 2019. So that's that other blemish from his record. The only time he's ever been out-totaled is against a powerlifter who you might have heard of, Ray Williams. So in 2016 USAPL Raw Nationals, Dennis actually competed as a 120 plus. And when I say 120 plus, he weighed in at 124 something, right? And he totaled 985, which finished second, but Ray obviously totaled, I think it was like 1070 something. And Ray weighed like 180 kilos. So he outweighed Dennis by 50 plus kilos easily. And that is the only time Dennis Cornelius has ever been out-totaled head-to-head raw, was against arguably one of the greatest powerlifters of all time, who outweighed him by over 50 kilos, right? When it comes to having a defeat on your record, it's not a bad one to have. So that's why when I say basically undefeated, I mean that he's never lost to anyone in his weight class, right? He's only ever lost to Ray Williams. As far as head-to-head wins goes, he basically beat every top 120 of his era, which wasn't that much compared to now. Tony Cliff was still around back then, has since gone on to win 2 world titles since Dennis Cornelius left the IPF. But yeah, Dennis beat Tony head-to-head twice, and it wasn't just by a few kilos. It was like a good 40, 50 plus kilos that he beat him by. Mohamed Bouafia, who won the early world titles as a 120, Dennis beat him. Mike T, obviously legend of the game, early podium finisher at Worlds a few times as well. Jared Martin, who has since, totaled pretty crazy stuff in the USAPL a few years back. I think he lifts equipped now. But basically every top 120 of his era, Dennis Cornelius beat, right? Obviously, had he have stuck around longer, he would have had a few more names there. The Tony Cliff wins aged very well, considering how, Tony is, like I said, won a bunch of national titles since and 2 world titles. But okay, so what happened with Dennis Cornelius? Why did he leave? Well, back in the sort of mid to late 2010s, powerlifting was a very different landscape. This is when I got first interested in powerlifting, I guess you would say, around that era. And I remember back in those days, it was actually the untested side of the sport that was much more appealing, much more prestigious. There was more attention being paid to it. IPF was like a little subset of the sport. People didn't care too much about it, or nowhere near as what we do now. And the untested side was huge. You had all the big names at that point in time. So Dennis Cornelius, having no competition on the tested side, like I said, he was out-totaling the best lifters at Worlds in his weight class by 50, 60, 70 kilos easily, right? And his only competition is when he would go up and lose to Ray Williams, right? Which he did that one time, who outweighed him by 55 kilos, right? Like he's not going to bridge that gap. But he was that much stronger than every other non-super heavyweight in the world. So he thought, why the heck not? I'm going to go over to the untested side, where I don't have to do a 2-hour weigh-in. I can do a 24-hour weigh-in. I can lift on a deadlift bar, right? He never, I don't think, fully transitioned to the untested side, meaning he never actually used any banned substances, because he went back and forth between USAPL and USPA, right? And his numbers weren't drastically different. The thing is, though, Dennis was so strong, he almost broke the untested 125 kilo world record, right? Which, yeah, weight class is different on the untested side of 125. And you might be thinking, oh, okay, that was probably some record held by some obscure powerlifter we don't know about. Well, again, that record was held at the time by a powerlifter you might have heard of by the name of Larry Wheels. Larry Wheels, for Christ, probably the most famous powerlifter ever, right? When it comes to casual audiences, anyway. Larry Wheels, back in the day, held the 125 kilo raw untested world record with a total of 1031.9 back in 2017. It was done obviously on pound plates, hence the weird decimal there. In 2017, Dennis Cornelius, at a meet where he totaled 1,015 kilos, his best ever raw total, he attempted on his final deadlift a 362.5 pull, just shy of 800 pounds, which would have given him 1032.5 and chipped Larry Wheels' world record by about half a kilo. And this is how close he came to taking Larry Wheels' untested world record. Just slipped out of his hands right at lockout. So, again, Larry Wheels at the time was an absolute monster, and one of the big reasons why the untested side had a much more casual appeal than the IPF did. He was like one of the big stars of the sport, right? And Dennis, as a tested lifter, who was going back and forth between USAPL, USPA, right? In 2017, he almost beat Larry Wheels. How insane is that? This is the challenge this guy had to go after, because that's how good he was. He was almost better than all the untested guys. Absolutely insane. He also competed in wraps once. So in 2018 at the Kern US Open, which was a huge meet back in the day, like bigger than IPF Worlds level meet, right? On the untested side, he squatted 432.5 raw with wraps, which moved ridiculously. I reckon he could have hit 1,000 if he had kept lifting wraps probably. And he totaled 1040. which I didn't include in his best numbers because I'm looking at raw. This is raw with wraps, right? But yeah, he totaled 1040 raw with wraps at the Kern US Open in 2018. And I guess technically this was the only other time he got out-totaled, so quote-unquote beaten by someone in his weight class. This was in the 140 kilo weight class, where he weighed like 125 or 126 again. And he actually technically lost to, again, Larry Wheels. Larry Wheels also lifted in the 140 weight class, and he also totaled 1040. So again, he technically didn't out-total Dennis. He just hit the same total, but he was lighter by like 3 or 4 kilos in body weight. So technically he won, right? But I think that meet worked on coefficient, which was Wilkes back then anyway. So yeah. I didn't include that in his win-loss ratio because it was done, again, raw with wraps, not raw. But if the only two people that have ever out-totaled you or technically beaten you in the same weight class head-to-head are Ray Williams and Larry Wheels, you know you're doing something right. Like, that's the level of competition that Dennis had to go after because he was that much better than everyone else. However, he did beat pretty much every other top untested guy back in that day, right? So like Rob Philippus, quads like Rob, as you may know him, was one of the huge untested lifters back in the day. Dennis beat him. Brandon Allen was another huge untested lifter back in the day. I think he's an arm wrestler now, right? One of the best super heavyweight untested lifters. Dennis Cornelius beat him head to head as well, right? So Dennis was beating all of the untested guys, right? And it's like, fair enough. Why would you not compete there when it was a bigger side of the sport than the IPF side at that point in time? And it was better conditions for him, being an easier way to make weight, deadlift bar, right? Better conditions, bigger meat. It would make sense. And plus, he just happened to be stronger than pretty much all of them, right? As well. Like, he almost took the record. That's how strong he was. So, an IPF lifter that was so good, he, damn near beat all the untested guys. That's how good Dennis Cornelius was. Kids these days forget, man. I say that because I've had some references in comments that I'm one of those kids that has forgotten some of the OGs. Well, I still remember these times, man. Dennis Cornelius, when he was a top dog. But Dennis Cornelius has not competed since 2021. So in 2021, that was his last meet that he did, which was back in the USAPL. So again, like I said, he's constantly bounced between untested, tested federations throughout his career. Hence why, I still think he was a tested lifter. Or, never used certain substances, is what I'm trying to say. But 2021, he won Raw Nationals, his fourth and final national title. And then he just stopped competing. I think he also grapples, does MMA or jiu-jitsu, which is absolutely frightening that there is some poor bastard out there who has to be a sparring partner or a grappling buddy for Dennis Cornelius of all people. Guy could probably tear you in half with how strong he is. And he hasn't competed since 2021. And he kind of sort of disappeared. He obviously didn't compete in the IPF since 2017. He only did those 2 years at the IPF. And after that, he sort of kept dabbling between USAPL and USPA meets, doing the big untested meets of the day, which probably didn't, I'm sure the IPF weren't the biggest fans of that. I don't know if that had any factor to play in the fact he never went back to Worlds, but that's what he ended up doing, which I can't blame him for based on how powerlifting looked back in the day. Okay, so before we look at where he is now, which I will go back to that at the end, let's get into the hypothetical part and the what if part, right? So if you look at the IPF Worlds winning totals in the 120 weight class, there it is for every single world championship the IPF has ever had. Obviously, those 2 years, which are the 2 outlier years, where the total is so much higher than everything around it, were the 2 years Dennis was there, right? Now, if you look at the winning totals in pretty much every year since, maybe barring the previous year, I would say that Dennis probably pretty easily could have won another 5 world titles if he had competed in the IPF between 2018 and 2023. I do believe he likely would have won all of those pretty easily, or definitely from 2018 to 2022. And 2023 in the 950s, that's still over 20 kilos below what he could do, right? So I do think it is not a controversial statement. It is not a stretch by any means to say he very definitely, or not definitely, but very likely would have won those world titles. I won't necessarily give him last year because that was, Bob Matthews did 970, probably could have done more had he have needed it. So let's be conservative and not give him that. But I think we can give him another 5 world titles pretty handily. For reference, here are the 120 plus winning totals, and here's where he would have placed with his 978.5, which is his best total in IPF conditions. Not to mention he has totaled over 1,000 as a 120 something, 125-ish under untested conditions, which I know is different, but puts in perspective. I mean, funny enough, if he had found his way into 2019 Worlds, he would have won probably, but that's due to Ray bombing out that year. But yeah, I don't think he could have won any 120 plus totals. That's just kind of a put into perspective sort of thing that I included. But yeah, I think safe to say Dennis Cornelius would have been a 7-time world champion by now, in the 120 kilo weight class, to go alongside with his 2 other world titles that he already won. And I believe he would have been the first non-super heavyweight to go 1,000 plus, to total over 1,000 kilos in raw tested conditions. Because even though he did it as a 125 lifter in an untested fed, it kind of, I guess, doesn't really fully count because he was still over 120 kilos and was done like on a deadlift bar, 24-hour weigh-ins, all that. If he had stayed in the IPF, I think he very easily, well, not easily, but he definitely could have pushed his total to over 1,000, and be the first technically non-super heavyweight to do that in the IPF. It still hasn't been done in the IPF. Rondell is the only 120 lifter who has totaled over 1,000 kilos. He's the only non-super heavyweight lifter to have totaled over 1,000 kilos under raw tested conditions, right? Like I'm talking stiff bar, 2-hour weigh-ins, all that kind of stuff. But I think Dennis could have done that had he had stayed in that IPF umbrella the whole time. He also would have lifted at Sheffield. However, I think he would have fell into the same bucket as Amanda Lawrence, which what I mean by that is Amanda Lawrence kind of suffered from her own success because all those years she was dominating at Worlds pre-Sheffield, she kept pushing her own world record because she was that far ahead of everyone else. She just kept pushing it for the sake of pushing it. And Sheffield came around and she's like, oh crap, I've pushed my own world record even though I haven't needed to, and it's come back to bite me at Sheffield. I think Dennis probably would have fell into that same boat because, again, he would have had no competition at those years in Worlds, which you could see that from what the winning totals were. Like, we're talking 20 to 50 kilos below what he could have done. So he probably would have kept pushing his world record, and then Sheffield would have come around and he would have been sort of, victim of his own success. So I'm not going to give him any Sheffield titles or podiums in my hypothetical, although he still would have lifted there, which would have been cool. And I'm going to, go out on a limb here and say, if Dennis could have achieved these things, I think that would make him the GOAT, the greatest raw powerlifter of all time. I do believe that. 7 world titles. I mean, Sergey Fedosienko has 8, but 59 kilo class competition, very slim. Not to take that away from him, I still consider him the GOAT, right? When I did my GOAT ranking, but yeah, Dennis Cornelius with these credentials and with how strong he was as a 120 and all the insane head-to-head wins he would have racked up had he have stayed in the IPF for those years, absolutely GOAT. So, where is he now? It's interesting to mention that he was never a young guy doing powerlifting. In 2016, when he won his first world title, he was already 35 years old. So he's 44 years old now. However, as I'm about to show you, he's still one of the strongest 120s in the world. Potentially even the strongest if you're not counting Rondell. But where is he now? Like I said, 2021 was his last competition. In 2024, he announced, or SBD announced, that he was a wildcard for SBD Rally. Right? SBD Rally being that huge meet where they're trying to break the American record by as much as possible. That's where Joey B totaled 865. So 2024, July last year, he was supposed to do that. And in preparation for that, he showed some of his training clips and he actually put together some pretty insane numbers. Keep in mind, at this point, he was 43 years old. He still squatted 376.5. He still benched 254. pretty smoothly. And he still deadlifted 347. And yes, it's with straps, but he also did it for a double. So kind of cancels out. I know grip has been one of his failure modes when it comes to deadlifts. So yeah, straps, a bit hard to make out what he could have hit on the platform. But if you add those numbers together, he had a 977.5 training total leading into SBD Rally mid last year, which was only 1 kilo off his best ever. And that's with a deadlift double, albeit with straps. However, he again kind of disappeared, and I don't think he shared any explanation as to why this was, but I'm not aware of any. If someone is, let me know. But he just kind of like randomly stopped posting for a few months, and just didn't do SBD Rally, right? And didn't really give an explanation, which kind of sucked. I was really looking forward to him coming back, because a lot of people today don't know about Dennis Cornelius and how good he was, which part of why I'm making this video. But I think he could have done pretty damn well, and raised a few eyebrows at his age and what he's able to do. Unfortunately, he didn't for whatever reason, but he started posting training again a few months ago, or late last year, and he's still looking very strong. In fact, his most recent training clips, his squat, this is from only 2 weeks ago, right? He hit a 349 kilo squat for a set of 4. So this is still looking very strong, and he's 44 years old now. He's in his mid-40s, and he's still hitting these insane weights, insane sets that make him up there with the best 120s in the world. Again, in this potential hypothetical that I laid out with him winning all these world titles, Rondell still wouldn't have been there. If Dennis Cornelius had stayed in the IPF, he wouldn't have had to deal with Rondell, because he's only coming to the IPF from next year. He also hit this 500-pound bench for a set of 4, 227 kilos. This was also done 2 weeks ago. Yes, he was touch and go, but still, 500 pounds for a set of 4. His bench strength is still there. And this deadlift, 349 kilo double. And this is without straps. This is with hook grip. This was done 2 months ago. And this is actually was a lifetime PB for him. So not only is he retaining his strength from all those years ago for a world record that still stands, but he's also getting better. Like, this is a weight that apparently he's never doubled before. Here he is at the age of 44 at his best ever numbers. Insane. Now, if you put those numbers into a 1 rep max calculator, which I know, again, people don't really like because it's not super accurate, which I agree with, but it gives you a rough ballpark, right? If you put those sets into 1 rep max calculator, those are the numbers that you get roughly, which give a 988 total, which is 10 kilos above his best ever total, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility based on how strong he looked in those sets. Not to mention, we don't even know how peaked he is and how close he is, to his peak strength when he posted those. But a 988 total, to put that into context, the American 120 national champion, Devin Williams, won the national title and clinched his spot to Worlds with a 945.5 at the most recent PNAS just gone. Now, I know that technically Devin Williams didn't need to do any more than that. I know that he had a bunch of other circumstances going on in his life. Prep was far from ideal, and he did basically what he needed to do to win. I know he's totaled 970 before, but still, a 988 theoretical Dennis Cornelius. I don't think Devin Williams has 988 top end in him. It would have been a close battle for sure, but I think Dennis Cornelius could have beat him if he was there, potentially. You never know. Obviously, Bob didn't do PA Nats. So let's say Dennis Cornelius did win the national title and did clinch his spot to Worlds. Well, if you look at the Worlds nominations, a 988 would be number 1. Obviously, you have Nonso at 965. Etienne 958.5, silver medals from last year. Devin with his 945.5. Then you have a couple around the 930s, 920s, and it goes down from there. But yeah, a 980s Dennis Cornelius would be nominated number 1 and would probably still be the favorite. I mean, I don't know, Nonso maybe still be the favorite because he has more left in him than 965 in all likelihood. But Yeah, but this just goes to show that in this hypothetical universe, if Dennis Cornelius had stayed lifting under the IPF umbrella, he would potentially have won his who knows how manyth national title this year, and he would be in contention for what would be likely his 8th world title, which would equal the most ever on the IPF Raw side. So there you have it. There's my the deep dive into Dennis Cornelius' career and a hypothetical look into an alternate universe where he had stayed in the IPF. And in my opinion, he would have been the undisputed GOAT. And I do hope we see him come back and compete properly soon. Like I said, his recent numbers are still looking very strong. He hasn't competed in 4 years. I do think he can make a run at, well, it might be a bit hard with Worlds. Who knows if, what Bob's going to do next year, whether he comes back. But yeah, Dennis Cornelius is one of the greatest powerlifters of all time, even with his current credentials. But if he had stayed, man, he would have been undisputed.